Have you ever been so busy thinking about life, that you forgot to actually live it? What if the greatest opportunities you've lost weren't because you failed, but because you never stopped overthinking long enough to take the first step? Every morning, before the first rays of sunlight touched the rooftops of the quiet European town, thousands of people opened their eyes carrying burdens that no one else could see. Their bodies prepared for another ordinary day, but their minds had already traveled into tomorrow, replaying yesterday's mistakes and worrying about problems that hadn't even happened yet. While birds greeted the morning with cheerful songs and golden sunlight slowly warmed the streets, countless people remained trapped inside endless conversations with themselves, missing the beauty unfolding right in front of them. Among those people was a 19-year-old university student named Lucas. From the outside, Lucas appeared to have everything going for him. He was intelligent, respectful, hardworking, and admired by both his professors and classmates. His parents believed he had a bright future ahead, and his friends often came to him whenever they needed thoughtful advice because Lucas always considered every possibility before making a decision. Everyone saw him as careful and responsible. No one realized that the same habit people admired was quietly becoming the biggest obstacle in his life. Lucas didn't simply think before acting. He questioned every decision until it became exhausting. Choosing a university subject could take hours because he feared selecting the wrong one. Sending a simple text message meant rewriting it over and over again, wondering if each word sounded strange or would be misunderstood. Before answering a question in class, he would think through every possible response, only to remain silent because someone else answered first. Every opportunity in life seemed to disappear while Lucas was still deciding whether it was the right one. As weeks turned into months, overthinking quietly became his daily routine. Even after making a decision, his mind refused to let it go. He constantly wondered if another choice would have been smarter, safer, or better. Every conversation replayed itself inside his head long after it had ended. Every small mistake felt enormous. Every uncertain future became a disaster in his imagination. His mind never gave him permission to rest because it was always preparing for a future that hadn't arrived. At night, when the city finally became quiet, Lucas's thoughts became louder. He would lie awake staring at the ceiling while imaginary conversations played over and over inside his mind. He imagined failing exams that hadn't happened, disappointing people who had never judged him, and losing opportunities that didn't even exist. The silence of his bedroom was filled with endless questions, endless doubts, and endless fear. While his body remained perfectly still, his mind was running a marathon that never reached the finish line. The strange part was that Lucas's life wasn't falling apart. His grades were excellent. His family loved him. He had supportive friends, good health, and countless opportunities ahead of him. Yet none of those blessings felt enough because his attention was always focused on what could go wrong instead of appreciating what was already going right. Without realizing it, Lucas had become addicted to preparing for problems instead of living the life he already had. One cool autumn afternoon, after finishing another long day at university, Lucas decided to walk home instead of taking the usual bus. The streets glowed beneath soft golden sunlight as crimson and amber leaves drifted gently through the air. Children laughed while chasing one another across the town square, a violinist filled the street with a peaceful melody, and elderly couples enjoyed slow conversations on wooden benches beneath the colorful trees. The entire town seemed alive with quiet happiness. For a brief moment, Lucas noticed it all. Then, almost instantly, his thoughts returned. Did I sound foolish when I answered that question in class? What if I fail my final exams? What if everyone else is moving ahead while I'm falling behind? Within seconds, the beauty around him disappeared behind the noise inside his own mind. His eyes were open, but he wasn't really seeing the world anymore. He was trapped inside a future that hadn't happened and a past that could never be changed. Without paying attention to where he was walking, Lucas wandered into a small park hidden behind rows of towering maple trees. In the center of the park stood a quiet lake whose still water reflected the golden evening sky. Beside the lake sat an elderly man on a weathered wooden bench, calmly feeding a handful of small birds. Unlike everyone else in the busy town, he wasn't checking a phone, watching a clock, or hurrying toward another destination. He simply watched the birds with a peaceful smile, as though he had discovered something the rest of the world had forgotten. Lucas slowed his steps. For reasons he couldn't explain. The noise inside his mind became just a little quieter. And for the first time in a very long time, he wondered if the problem had never been his life. Maybe. The problem was the way he was thinking about it. Lucas couldn't stop thinking about the elderly man by the lake. There was nothing extraordinary about him. He wore simple clothes, carried no signs of wealth or success, and sat quietly on an old wooden bench while feeding tiny birds that landed fearlessly around him. Yet the peaceful expression on his face was something Lucas had not seen in years, not in his professors, not in busy businesspeople, and certainly not in himself. It was the kind of peace that couldn't be bought, earned, or achieved. It simply existed. The following afternoon, instead of rushing home after university, Lucas found himself walking back to the same park. The golden autumn leaves still danced gently in the wind, and the quiet lake reflected the pale blue sky like a giant mirror. The elderly man was sitting on the same bench, watching the gentle ripples spread across the water. He wasn't doing anything important. He wasn't trying to be productive. He was simply present, appreciating a moment that most people would have walked past without noticing. As Lucas slowly wandered through the park, he became aware of something unusual. Children were laughing while chasing one another across the grass without worrying about tomorrow. Birds landed on tree branches without questioning where they would fly next. Even the falling leaves seemed peaceful as they floated wherever the wind carried them. Everything around him simply existed in the present moment. Only humans seemed determined to live everywhere except where they actually were. That realization stayed with him as he sat alone on another bench overlooking the lake. Without thinking, Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Within seconds, he was checking messages, scrolling through social media, comparing his life to people he barely knew, and wondering whether he was doing enough with his own future. His heart began to race again. The same anxiety returned almost instantly. Then something unexpected happened. A cool breeze slipped across the lake, carrying a handful of golden maple leaves through the air. One small leaf landed gently on the screen of his phone, covering it completely. Lucas looked up without thinking. The lake shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Birds skimmed gracefully across the water. The wind whispered softly through the trees. For just a few seconds, his attention left the endless noise inside his head and returned to the world around him. Those few seconds felt different. There were no imaginary conversations. No future disasters. No endless questions. Just silence. Not the silence around him. The silence within him. Lucas realized something that made him uncomfortable. The world had not been stealing his peace. His own thoughts had. Every beautiful moment in front of him had been interrupted by a mind that refused to stop predicting, analyzing, and worrying. He had spent years believing overthinking was protecting him from making mistakes, but in reality it had been preventing him from experiencing life itself. As the afternoon slowly faded into evening, Lucas watched the elderly man stand up and quietly leave the park. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. No speech. No advice. No life-changing conversation. Yet somehow, simply observing a person who lived without rushing had begun to change the way Lucas looked at his own life. Walking home that evening, Lucas made a small promise to himself. Tomorrow, he would spend just 1 hour without overthinking. No checking his phone every few minutes. No replaying conversations. No worrying about problems that hadn't happened. Just 1 hour of simply living the moment in front of him. It sounded almost impossible. But deep inside, Lucas felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope. The next morning, Lucas kept the promise he had made to himself. It sounded simple, just 1 hour without overthinking, but the moment he woke up, his mind tried to pull him back into its old habits. Before even getting out of bed, thoughts began racing through his head. What if I'm late for class? What if I forget something important? What if today's presentation doesn't go well? It was as if his mind had become a machine that could only produce worries. But instead of following every thought, Lucas took a slow breath, stood up, and quietly opened his bedroom window. The cool morning air rushed inside, carrying the scent of fresh rain and blooming flowers from the gardens below. Birds greeted the sunrise with cheerful songs while soft golden light painted the rooftops of the old town. For years, these mornings had existed without Lucas ever noticing them. He had always been physically present but mentally somewhere else. This morning was different. Instead of thinking about everything that could go wrong, he simply watched the sunrise. It lasted only a few minutes, but those few minutes felt strangely peaceful. Throughout the day, Lucas caught himself drifting back into overthinking dozens of times. During class, he almost began worrying about his upcoming exams. While eating lunch, he started comparing himself to classmates who seemed more confident. Walking through the university courtyard, he almost reached for his phone to check social media for the 10th time that day. Each time it happened, he gently reminded himself to return to the present moment. He listened to the sound of footsteps on the stone pathway, noticed the colorful autumn leaves dancing in the wind, and smiled as children laughed in a nearby playground. Little by little, the noise inside his head became quieter. Days slowly turned into weeks, and something remarkable began to happen. Lucas didn't become a completely different person overnight. He still had worries. He still faced challenges. But those worries no longer controlled every moment of his life. Instead of spending hours imagining the worst possible outcome, he learned to focus on what he could actually do today. The future stopped feeling like an endless source of fear and started becoming something he could face one step at a time. His friends soon noticed the difference. Lucas laughed more often. He smiled without forcing it. He joined conversations without replaying every word in his head afterward. Even his university work improved, not because he studied longer, but because his mind was finally clear enough to concentrate on the task in front of him instead of fighting imaginary battles. The energy he had wasted on endless thinking was now being used to actually live. One evening, Lucas returned to the quiet park where everything had begun. The same wooden bench stood beside the peaceful lake, and golden leaves still floated gently across the water. The elderly man wasn't there this time, but somehow, his absence didn't matter. Lucas looked around and realized the park had never been magical. The lake had not changed him. The birds had not changed him. Even the old man hadn't changed him. The only thing that had changed was where Lucas chose to place his attention. He finally understood that peace had never been hidden somewhere else. It had always been waiting in the present moment, patiently waiting for him to stop chasing every thought that entered his mind. As the evening sun disappeared behind the trees, Lucas smiled quietly to himself. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't crowded with questions about tomorrow. It was completely at home. Today. Months passed, and life continued exactly as it always had. University assignments still arrived every week. Unexpected problems still appeared. Some days were exhausting, while others tested Lucas's patience and confidence. The world around him never became easier, and his responsibilities never disappeared. But something inside him had changed in a way he never thought possible. The storm that had once lived inside his mind had slowly become a quiet breeze. He no longer believed he had to solve every future problem before it arrived. Instead, he learned to give his full attention to the only moment he could truly control, the one he was living right now. Lucas discovered that overthinking had never actually protected him. It hadn't prevented failure, removed uncertainty, or guaranteed success. All it had done was steal moments he could never get back. It stole peaceful mornings by replacing them with anxious thoughts. It stole joyful conversations by making him analyze every word. It stole beautiful sunsets because he was too busy worrying about tomorrow to look at the sky above him. The greatest thief in his life had never been time. It had been the constant noise inside his own mind. One bright spring morning, Lucas walked through the same park where everything had begun months earlier. Winter had disappeared, replaced by colorful flowers, fresh green trees, and birds building nests among the branches. Children laughed beside the lake, artists quietly painted the scenery, and elderly couples enjoyed slow walks beneath the warm sunshine. The park looked more alive than ever, yet Lucas realized something remarkable. The park hadn't changed. It had always been this beautiful. The difference was that now, he was finally present enough to see it. As he sat on the familiar wooden bench overlooking the calm water, Lucas smiled quietly. The elderly man who had unknowingly inspired him was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps he had moved away. Perhaps he simply visited another place. Lucas never found out. But he understood that the old man had already given him the greatest lesson without saying a single word. Sometimes the most powerful teachers never give a lecture. They simply remind us how to live. Lucas looked across the peaceful lake as sunlight danced gently across the water. He no longer felt the need to predict every possible future or replay every mistake from the past. Life was still uncertain, and it always would be. But uncertainty no longer frightened him. Instead of trying to control everything that might happen tomorrow, he chose to fully experience what was happening today. For the first time in years, his heart felt lighter than his thoughts. As he stood up to leave the park, Lucas noticed something that made him smile even more. The path ahead was still long, filled with unknown turns and unexpected challenges. Nothing about his future had become guaranteed. Yet he walked forward with confidence, not because he finally had all the answers, but because he no longer believed he needed them. Sometimes, the happiest people aren't the ones who have the perfect life. They're the ones who stop fighting every thought. And start living every moment. Because the truth is simple. Overthinking doesn't protect your future. It only steals your present. Stop overthinking. Start living. Your life is happening now, not inside your thoughts.